just to focus and feel that you're in the safety of other women. And just having gender-specific treatment is something that, of course, minimizes distraction when people are trying to focus on the healing that they've come there to do. And then last but not least, we also have a French-only Francophone treatment center in Montreal.
And we also support people that have any overspending issues, as well as hypersexuality. Now with our gambling program, just to mention, we do have a provincially funded treatment program that we run that is intensive, and I might mention a little bit more about that later. I know we're still kind of waiting for a few people to filter in, but that's essentially ADAPT in a nutshell. So a really quick disclaimer, you might see the word PGBA throughout my presentation. That just means problem gambling and behavioral addiction. I always like to let folks know before I start a presentation that we are gambling, gaming, and technology neutral. Especially as we've all survived this pandemic, we're reliant on our devices. It's hard to completely escape technology. And so we're all about finding healthy ways to work with it. So we support abstinence and harm reduction at ADAPT for all of our programs, and specifically for our tech overuse program. And there's a lot of benefits to technology. So technology or games, they can certainly help us to shift abnormal behaviors. They can help us to feel connected to colleagues throughout the pandemic, to our friends, to our family members. They can also help to enhance or shift our attitudes and our moods, which I'll talk more about. And it allows us to explore. We can explore things about diverse countries, clients, things like that online. So I always like to start my presentations by asking each one of you to do a self-check. So you in no way, shape, or form have to share your experience during this self-check. But I know a lot of people attend with clients in mind, or kids, or family members. But it's really important that us as clinicians take a moment to recognize how we've been impacted in the last little while from technology. So I kind of want to ask you all to take a few moments to reflect upon your current tech use. And I'll oftentimes use screen use, meaning, television, Netflix, Spotify, podcasts included. So if you think of your responsibilities at work, or if you're in school, think of what your tech use is like, how many hours out of the day for your responsibilities. So for a lot of us, that can be anywhere in between 7 to 10 hours. Then I want you to think about your recreational use, right? So the things that you're doing after work or after school, right? A lot of us, once we finish a hard day, we're disconnecting through watching television, putting on Netflix, listening to something, playing a game, checking our personal email. So think of how much recreational screen time that you're using as well. Now ask yourself, how many of you disconnect from your devices completely, all of your screens, for one full day or half a day? Right? So a lot of us are using our devices each and every single day when we want to try to promote having at least half a day off, where we're doing something outdoors or something with our loved ones. And who here sleeps with the phone beside them, or with the television on at night? Because those can be really unhealthy behaviors. And has anyone ever continued to use technology despite negative consequences or the desire to stop? So have you ever been playing a game before a meeting's about to start, really wanting to finish that last level, or checking Facebook even though a client session's about to start? So there's certain things that we hook into habitually that we don't recognize can be problematic. And I can definitely see the chat going. I'm going to go through this presentation, and then I'll certainly make time for questions at the end, and I'll sift through the chat at that time as well. So what are the signs of problematic screen use? So some folks like the term internet addiction. We really use tech overuse. We believe that it encompasses a variety of screen issues. So excessive use And another disclaimer is a lot of our research put together for these presentations is research from 2015, 2016. There's some new research from 2021, which I'll incorporate as we go. But the Canadian Pediatric Society back in 2016 recognized that internet was becoming an addictive behavior for folks. And so they said that excessive use was when we are using our devices or screens for 5 hours. So not our work or school responsibilities, but recreational use beyond 5 hours every night without a break is excessive use, and that's when things become problematic. It's also a warning sign when people experience withdrawal. So a lot of times when I work with families or people that struggle with technology, they say, whoa, 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 I'm not physically ingesting anything. How could I experience withdrawal? Well, you know, gaming, gambling, spending issues, pornography issues, the same interactions happen in the brain as substance use, which I'll talk more about. And so people can certainly experience withdrawal, which looks like, you know, depression, sadness. Young ones will say feeling blue, intense anger outbursts, fights with other people. So when the devices are taken away, there can be a withdrawal. What that tells us is that we can build a tolerance for the amount of time and energy that we exhibit towards our devices. And so you might hear people say, well, I need to up my equipment. I need a better phone. I need a better camera, right? I need to use more hours on social media or my gaming. And so that's oftentimes a warning sign that tolerance has started to build. And of course, negative consequences. So this is where we see people struggling in school or struggling to maintain focus at work. Social isolation, so an emphasis on being alone in gaming or watching Netflix alone. Lying and arguments are big ones. And I work with a lot of youth that struggle with these issues, and whether they're, you know, youth or adults, people oftentimes they recognize that they have a problem, but even though they recognize that, they still continue to neglect their responsibilities or their relationships in an effort to continue as they were with the technology. So back in 2015, CAMH started publishing information recognizing that this is a growing issue in Ontario and Canada, if not globally. But back in 2015, we started to see people reaching out saying, I have a problem with my, you know, device use and I can't quit this on my own. So the largest population that reported being impacted were 18 to 29-year-olds, oftentimes people with a multitude of responsibilities, whether it's work, school, social responsibilities, being a part of the gaming culture. So people were already coming forward before the pandemic to report that they were having problems. And interesting enough, 24% of adults were reporting that they tried to make changes, but they couldn't do so and felt as though they needed an intervention or support. So this is where a lot of agencies, or I'll say a handful of agencies, started to recognize that we needed more information and training, and we have to recognize this is a very serious issue that's taking place in our communities. Now, with screen time and problematic video gaming, again, prior to the pandemic, 10% of students were reporting in the study that they played video games for 5+ hours a day. So already we were noticing that there was that excessive use starting to rise. A lot of them were students, and a lot of them were very transparent, recognizing that they did have moderate to severe issues. So with some new information from 2021, 92% of adolescents within a Canadian study, which was also done in the United States as well, reported that they were using devices outside of school for 9 hours a day. So we're recognizing that throughout the pandemic, as people are ordered to stay home, technology was really a crutch for a lot of folks. And it specifically impacted our youth, who were expected to now engage in virtual learning, and then of course wanted to be able to connect with their friends after school, which was largely through gaming and social media. Now, it's really important that we recognize, specifically as clinicians and as friends and family, that there are reasons that people would use technology excessively. So when people struggle with self-esteem, oftentimes they feel safe online, less judged, the ability to be anonymous and to find their clan, so to speak. There's also an ability to create characters that actually resemble who people truly are or who they aspire to be. So talking to your clients about their characters or your siblings or your kids, you really can learn a lot about that person just by asking about character development. It's also an effective short-term relief for individuals who struggle with anxiety and depression. So it provides an opportunity to avoid their symptoms, feel temporary relief, even though it can create longer-term problems, but it definitely alleviates some of the mental health pressures that individuals can experience. And it does provide social connection. So even prior to the pandemic, it provides safe communities so people can feel accepted, connected to each other. And I know throughout the pandemic, lots of us, this was our lifeline to be connected to some folks. So that is definitely a reason that people would use it even more. And it's challenging. So anyone that's played games know that there's a lot of excitement involved. There's a lot of mental stimulation, whether you're playing, word or battle games, things like that. We get very excited. We produce a lot of dopamine. And it feels really good to accomplish levels or to receive likes from people. And so it keeps us hooked and it keeps us engaged in some of these platforms. And escape. So it can provide temporary escape or distraction from the stress and the pressures of the world, of our social circles, of our jobs. And so that's a really large factor why a lot of people would continue to hook into it. So resulting problems. I hope everyone's familiar with the term FOMO. So pretty much recognized as the next wave of an anxiety disorder is this fear of missing out. So resulting problems of excessive use with technology means that mental health can worsen. So although we experience this short-term relief from our challenges, it creates longer-term issues because we forget to learn strategies how to manage these in the moment or in the long term. The fear of missing out creates so much stress for some individuals. If you're hooked into chess or you're in a team tournament, the culture can really be demanding and it can be very hard on you if you're not able to show up when expected. And it can also lead to a lot of disappointment and a lot of arguments, right, when technology is taken away. And irritability and exhaustion. So this is where we see a lot of personality changes, and this is really challenging for families. They become short with their loved ones. There's a lot of restrictions involved. We see self-care really start to be impacted. And so these are some of the problems that can happen over time when people rely on technology. There's also health impacts. So this is a lot of new information that I'm happy to share with you folks. There's a lot of physical issues that people, especially youth, are now reporting that we normally wouldn't see until we're older adults or seniors. Carpal tunnel syndrome, issues with the eyes, which I'll talk more about, back and neck issues. So the gaming posture is usually very far forward, or we're usually using screens quite close to our face, which is not good for us. And we see hygiene and self-care and things like this really start to go to the wayside. We're also seeing a lot of folks with body dysmorphia, eating disorders, eating irregularities, emotional eating, because of the fluctuations or the excessive tech use. But the biggest thing that we're noticing with our young ones and our adults is sleep. So sleep hygiene is so important. New information that we learned is that when young ones are not getting enough sleep and they're constantly on devices, it's creating a lot of attention issues, behavioral problems. So a lot of times it can look like ADD or ADHD when in fact it's a screen dependency. It can also create a lot of learning problems. Especially through the pandemic, we're seeing that kids aren't actually engaged and therefore able to focus when they're hooked into school because they have a variety of tabs open and they're multitasking, which isn't always the healthiest thing for us to do. And without proper sleep, there are a lot of challenges that we can face, specifically increased anxiety, issues with obesity, hypertension, and also the risk of accidents. So we see this a lot with our gambling and our gaming clients. When you're up all night and not sleeping and not eating properly throughout the day, then your risk of accidents becomes really high, especially if you're a driver, because you're pretty foggy and there's an inability to focus on the things that are actually really important. Now, something that was interesting for myself to learn this year, because I've always been a person that's been like, I can thrive off 4 to 5 hours of sleep, no problem. That's a myth. So that's not something that's actually factual, especially for our young ones who I hear that quite often. So developing brains, anybody under the age of 30 needs at least 7 hours of sleep in order for their brain to fully rest. So adolescents oftentimes will have problems with sleep if they're not disconnecting from their devices in a proper time before trying to rest. And also if they're keeping devices or technology in their bedrooms. So this can be a really important strategy for some folks, is to remove those devices at least 1 hour before bedtime. This is really important for ourselves as well. Keep it in another room, keep it out of sight and on sleep mode. So you can't hear any vibrations or rings throughout the evening, which can activate our stress response. Now, impacts on the brain. This is when we start to use some of our gambling information, but there's been a lot of recent research that validates that gambling and gaming, as well as substance use, have very similar impacts on our brain. So what happens when somebody is gaming or using technology or social media or gambling is that they produce a mass amount of dopamine that our brain is not used to producing. And what happens is that activates the reward hub in our brain. So when we produce a lot of it, it's basically like pushing the pedal to the metal in our cars, and we're flying at this high speed and we're feeling really great. But while we're doing that, we're not able to think rationally, to focus. And so what happens is our reward hub becomes something that's excessively important for us to fill. Now, a lot of technological companies, they spend a fortune on researching, the trends, what keeps people hooked in a gambling or gaming scenario. How can we get people hooked on these platforms? So as Facebook and Instagram as an example, you may post something on Facebook or Instagram, and really we post things so we can share, things about ourselves, but also so we can receive likes, right? That's our connection to the world a lot of times. And so when you post a photo, the algorithms of the platforms, they don't release 80 likes to you immediately if that's what you received, right? Instead, they slowly release these likes throughout the course of a day. And what this does is it builds your tolerance and your dependency, right? If you receive all this dopamine at once, that's great, but your brain's going to look for something else. But if you start to receive it slowly throughout the day, your brain says, I really like Facebook or Instagram. I want to continue to post because it's really doing something for my brain. I feel very rewarded. So that's kind of what takes place. That's why it's so addictive for a lot of folks. And also completing levels, that accomplishment piece for sure. Now, what happens over time is if we're so used to pushing that gas pedal, our brakes stop working. And this can be something that's temporary for some folks that have struggled for many, many years, especially with some pretty heavy substance use addictions. The brakes can be quite rusty or stop working. So what that means is our top-down control network has been really impacted by the behaviors we've been using excessively. And then what happens is over time, it becomes habitual. So I work with a lot of folks that say, I don't know why I continue to use these platforms because it's really doing something negative for me. What that goes to show is a shift within our brain that takes place. So over time, it actually stops lighting up the reward hub. We stop feeling that benefit that we once did when we post something, when we accomplish a level. And it goes to show that it's now lighting up our habit hub. So as a lot of you know, a habit is created when we develop a dependency and a tolerance for something. So oftentimes if it's something exciting, we'll want more of it. But when something's habitual, it becomes challenging to find excitement in other things. So you might have a loved one that says, you know, all I want to do is game because going out and playing basketball is not that exciting. Reading is not that exciting. It goes to show that a shift has taken place in the brain. And of course, the shift is not irreversible. As we all know, habits are very challenging to break, but not impossible. So some recent research that was done recognized that MRI scans, and I know this was a question in the forum before, it's very similar to substance use. Now, in order to give you kind of a framework, is people that are recording playing games or hooked into social media for about 20 plus hours per week for over about 6 to 8 months time, their brains are showing similar impacts as to somebody that's been using substances for several years. So as addiction clinicians or just mental health clinicians, it's important to be mindful that this is a serious issue and the two are very, very related. And then our stress responses. So this one's really important. Oftentimes an immediate response to somebody that's having an issue is to restrict them from it. But recognize, especially if you're parents, that when you take the devices away, their stress responses are very likely to trigger very easily. And so many of you might have experienced, of course, that FOMO, but also thinking that we're hearing a vibration of our phone. This happens to me a lot on the weekends. Even when I turn my phones off, I have a feeling that I'm hearing it go off. And so I have this, sense of urgency to check it. So this is a very natural and normal process. It can actually be part of the withdrawal process for some folks. Now, impacting the eye. So this is also some new information that I'm happy to share with you folks. And it's about myopia, and that's really nearsightedness. And it's really important to recognize that there's a genetic predisposition to this, first of all. So any child with one or both parents that struggle with this are likely to inherit it. However, when infants or young children are introduced to screens from an early age, there's a really high chance that they can develop nearsightedness. So things that are far very blurry, they have to read things up close in order for it to make sense. Now, the connection to technology is really, really important because what we've seen is that a lot of our young ones are spending less time outdoors, which creates a higher risk to developing issues with our eyes and our general health. So our eyes and our bodies, they need natural sunlight. That's really, really important. What the blue light does on a lot of our screens, which is why people can struggle with sleeping, is it basically sends a signal through our eyes to our brain that the sun is up when we check our phones. So some people can put different filters on their phones. You can keep it in night mode, and that is a healthier alternative. But oftentimes when we check that phone, when we wake up, when we're sleeping, it sends that message to our brain. So that can really start to impact a lot of people's sleeping habits. There's also, of course, throughout the pandemic as well, a high use of near work taking place. So I constantly find myself leaning forward, engaged in a conversation with somebody virtually. And then after that, if I don't move around, my body's quite tense and it's quite tight. We also have to watch how close we are to our phones, because a lot of people will hold their phones right at their face, and that can be really bad for our eyesight as well. Now on this graphic here, and I'll give you guys a resource if you're interested in looking more into kind of parenting recommendations and guidelines. It basically states that, and this is really challenging, I know how challenging it can be for folks, especially working professionals with kids, but basically anyone from the age of 0 to 2 should not have any screen time. Again, very, very challenging. But I work with a lot of folks who have individuals or young ones under 4, and they're very proud that they can open up the Google and search for YouTube on things, and that is not healthy for our young ones. So anyone under the age of 4 should really be slowly introduced to technology, having no more than 1 hour of screen time. Now, there's recommendations, and again, I'll provide this to you folks in a handout, and I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. But essentially, if we can responsibly introduce technology to young ones, by the time they get to 12, if they have a solid understanding of healthy and unhealthy tech use, they're likely to be very successful, and they learn about boundaries and they learn about disconnecting. So that's something that I really want to promote throughout the course of this presentation. So I think it's really, really important to talk about why people can't just stop using devices. There's something called a cycle of dependency that develops. So we use this a lot in our problem gambling and behavioral addictions program. Whether or not you struggle with screen use, some of us have a tendency to game or use social media. So tech use is a pretty general term here. If there's something that makes sense to you folks, just kind of mentally insert that there. But let's say that somebody struggles with a gaming issue, right? When they hook into gaming, they experience something called quick, easy, short-term effects. So they may hook on and connect with their friends, and that feels good. They may accomplish a level right away. They may purchase a skin, which looks really cool on their character. And so a lot of times, the moment you pick up a game or the moment you sign on to social media, something about that gives you the short-term sense of relief or happiness, or for some of us, just an escape from reality. So when that is there instantaneously, it's very likely that a person would increase the time gaming or using social media. Now, what happens over time is the more that you use it, the less likely you are to focus on the actual core skills that you've worked hard on developing or the skills that you need. And so this is where we see over time, a lot of folks really struggle with basic communication skills. Not being able to make eye contact, that's really big with a lot of me and my young clients. An inability to express their emotions because they're so used to just disconnecting from them. A difficult time maintaining honesty or trust with other folks, as well as financial wellness. So some of us work really hard to be, responsible with money or allowances. But when it comes to something that's so exciting and stimulating, sometimes people are being irresponsible with that. And it can certainly decrease our focus at school work or at home with our other responsibilities because we become so hyper-focused on that one activity. So eventually over time, as we continue to work through this cycle, your skills can erode. So if you don't use communication skills or expressing your emotions or maintaining trust with folks, we basically lose that ability. And what that does is it creates a difficult time for us to manage our emotions and our experiences. So the more that we isolate, the more that we neglect our issues and avoid our challenges, the more we'll keep depending on just escaping through that tech use or that gaming. And so this becomes a really unhealthy cycle that people develop, and it's really challenging to break because you just want to feel that sense of relief and you just want to feel a little better, but you're avoiding all these other things in the long run. Now, there are really vulnerable populations to developing a technology issue. Anyone with an anxiety disorder, ADD, ADHD, a lot of my clients report that they can't even read a paragraph out of a book, but they can remain engaged in Call of Duty for 4 hours. So for some folks, it does provide this temporary relief from their symptoms. For depression, it can be a major pick-me-up. So if somebody hasn't had a conversation with somebody in a few days or isn't, feeling connected to their social circle, posting a photo and somebody liking it, it can temporarily lift that depression. We see a lot of folks that struggle with bipolar disorder, again, in manic episodes, right? It helps them to regulate, to ground themselves. And it is that connection piece as well. And certainly we have a lot of folks who are on the autism spectrum come in, a lot of folks that are very creative with music or character development. And so that can quickly get out of hand because, again, they feel connected, they feel supported, and they feel engaged in something for longer periods of time. So this is that cycle of dependency, and it's really important that we're mindful of that. And that we start to explore, especially with clients, what's decreased as they focused on this behavior excessively. Now, switching into gaming. So this is a very hot topic. This is becoming a very busy program for us at ADAPT. And on the left is a list of some and not nearly all very popular games that are that people are using right now. And the big question is really, well, how are these games hooking folks? So I used to kind of call myself a gamer back in the day, but I'm very mindful that games have changed significantly from when I was playing Super Smash Brothers or Zelda, things like that, because all of the games that I played, they had a predefined end. So they would eventually end and you would get off of it and you would go look for something else. So many of the games today, they have an online component, expansion packs. So there's no natural endpoint that people are hitting. There's also continuous social connection. So a lot of people that I've worked with have had a really hard time connecting with anyone throughout the pandemic. And so having a game where you and your friends hook into, or people overseas where you can have different conversations with different people, the interacting part of games are very desirable for a lot of folks. And rewards-based. So players don't oftentimes know what they're going to get in certain games, whether it's through a loot box or a reward or an advancement, an accomplishment, a team tournament. So there's so many more rewards that are built into a variety of the games that people play. And they continue to evolve. This is really, really big, especially for young ones or hardcore adult gamers, is that knowing that a game is continuing to evolve without them, it really does, encourage them not to sleep, not to miss out on tournaments, even if they have a really important, event to get to with their family or friends. So this is where a lot of anxiety or that FOMO builds with folks. And avatar attachment. So what I've learned along the way is a lot of gamers are some of the most creative people you will ever meet. And so they have an attachment to the characters that they create. And earlier I mentioned, because a lot of us design characters that resemble ourselves or the strengths that we have, or the strengths or personality characteristics that we would love to have. So the introvert might build a really extroverted character who seems really cool and connected to other folks and doesn't have that same social anxiety. So it can be really, really important as loved ones and as clinicians to talk to people about their characters. There's a lot of great, meaningful conversations that you can have there. So monetization in gaming, I think this is really important to recognize, is that there are so many platforms to have currency in the virtual world. So there's prepaid cards, there's Bitcoin, there's PayPal, there's Visa, there's iTunes, ways to transfer money on Facebook. So it's really important that you recognize it's so easy to put money in. It's very hard to get that money out. Some interesting research that was done by the YGAP in 2018 recognized that most grade 7s had a PayPal account designed for gaming. So, you know, with the job that I have, a lot of times I'll deal with parents or families who are now in a financial crisis because a variety of dollars were spent on games and the parents weren't aware of that. So it's really important that you recognize, you know, if your cards are attached to anything like Steam accounts, things like that, it can be really important to recognize what people are buying and how much money they're spending. So most games nowadays do have purchase options. It's also kind of a way to cut corners in games. So if you want to advance levels, you can usually pay a small amount or medium amount of money in order to advance. And that's something that's quite new. It didn't normally exist back in the day. But there's also chance items that people can receive in games, which I'll talk more about in just a second. So it's really important to be mindful of, you know, how people are using currency, especially if you've got young ones with you. Now, loot boxes. So at the top, it says that loot boxes resemble gambling. I want to be bold and say that loot boxes are a form of gambling. A variety of countries have recognized that young ones are gambling in a variety of games. And so there's been some policies put in place where games are having to change or remove loot boxes. So this hasn't happened just yet in Canada. We're hoping that legislation does start to be introduced because it's really unhealthy that our young ones, you know, age 7 and up, are learning what gambling is. It really desensitizes them to it, makes it very likely they'd try it as an adolescent or an adult. So what are loot boxes? For those of you that are unfamiliar with it, it's basically putting some money up in order to receive a box with a variety of unknown items that you can either use or not use. So people will oftentimes, as you can see the little graphic on the right, they might pay $20 to receive 24 items. So they don't know what they're going to get, but they're going to put their money up and hope that they get a really rare weapon or something that they can use for their character and for their game. But in reality, my understanding is that a lot of folks might end up getting a red hat or a new pair of shoes for a character as opposed to that really big item that they'd like to have. So it's a really unpredictable way where people are losing a lot of money. Now, loot boxes, they are designed to exploit someone's psychological vulnerabilities, right? And they do reinforce spending money, which makes them so dangerous. So it's really important to have these conversations with clients or with loved ones, because again, a lot of kids within the age 7 to 12 range are engaging in these in certain games. Now, pivoting a little bit into social media. So this is some of our 2015 research, but at that time, 1 in 6 students that engaged in this survey throughout Canada reported that they were spending 5+ hours on social media daily. And if you think about your social media use, it's very quick for those numbers to add up. A lot of us doom scroll is what we call it on Facebook, where all of a sudden you've gone through an entire day or 1,000 different posts. And so it happens to a lot of us, but it's when people are doing it every day or excessively, it can become a large issue. Now, the one thing that I absolutely have to talk about is social media influencers and money. So it's really, really important that each one of us understands, and everybody that we can tell, that we do not always receive accurate information online. So whether it's political, whether it's gaming culture, whether it's celebrity news, it is not always accurate. It's really up to us to do the research for a lot of things. So what are influencers? These are people that we deem celebrities or people that are endorsed by companies to promote products. So a lot of us look up to certain folks, and if they have a big following of people, if they make a lot of money, a lot of advertisers or brands will reach out to them and say, hey, could you promote this product and we'll give you X amount of money. Now, we don't always know until recently, where there was some legislation put forward that influencers have to say when they're advertising for a company or a brand. But we might not always as consumers know that. So we buy these products or these festival tickets in faith that they are going to be what they sell online, and they're not. Now, this becomes problematic because these are the attitudes and thoughts that, and desires that are shaping our minds. So it's really important that we pay attention to the people that we follow, what they stand for, what they represent on their platform, and what they're promoting. This is especially important with young ones who are watching a lot of YouTube or streamers, and then all of a sudden they may report an online or promote an online casino game, and the young ones may hook into that instantly, thinking that they'll get free money. So this is a really big industry. It's important to recognize that in 2019, it was about an $8 billion sponsored influencer post. So that's only going to continue to increase online. If you're interested in more information, there's a lot online, but there's one at the bottom, The Influence of Power and Social Media Influencers. It's a really great article to check out. So stressors related to social media, just to kind of sum this portion up. A lot of times people will compare themselves online. It's so important to recognize that people only post their best moments. So I don't want to put down social media in any way, but a lot of us spend way too much time comparing ourselves to what folks have, as opposed to just appreciating the things that we do have and value the most. So if you have somebody saying, everyone's life is more exciting than mine, I'm not getting enough likes compared to another person, I'm not good enough, that can be really important to address. Signs of a problem. So this can be great for clinicians to start asking some of their clients. Really what we're looking for when we ask these questions are any sort of emotional, behavioral, financial changes or challenges that people are having with time. So if somebody is constantly late, if somebody is falling asleep often, they're not being as productive, they have a hard time paying attention, they're reporting that they're always bored. If you're having a conversation with somebody and they're distracted very easily, especially on their devices, these can be signs that there might be a problem. Now, it's really important to recognize that technology is not bad. It's a very small population of folks within Ontario that report having a challenge, that openly report having a challenge with technology. But for the people that it is problematic with, we really do have to take it seriously. And I think each one of us, for ourselves and our loved ones and our clients, can talk about this a little bit more to make sure that people aren't substituting technology for alcohol or other drugs and things like that. Now, healthy usage. So this is when we're going to get into the recommendations and the strategies component. People say, how can I limit screen time? There's nothing else to do. Well, it's really important that we make wellness our priority. So self-care, and that's different for everybody, but it's really important that we recognize what our self-care regimen looks like and how we can continue to develop upon it. The most important thing that I've learned this year is to avoid scrolling. So there is a difference between consumption versus creation. And what that means is if we open up Instagram or Facebook and we are scrolling, doing our doom scrolling, we are consuming a lot of messages and information, and that can really have a negative impact on our mood. However, if we are creating something, so if you're making infographics, if you are making characters, if you are making music, we are creating something, it activates a different area of our brain, and it's actually much healthier for us. So there's a big difference between consuming information and creating things online. So creation can be part of a harm reduction strategy for individuals that really struggle with excessive use. We certainly want to limit the amount of recreational screen time each day. So when Netflix asks you if you want to keep watching, take that as a cue as you might want to bounce off and go for a walk or make a snack or, talk to somebody. So we can use that as a cue to bounce ourselves off. Set reminders in your phone to go outside, to step out on the balcony, get a fresh breath of air. So it's really important that we do other things and make time for offline hobbies. Make sure that we're eating and that we're finding ways to exercise our bodies and most importantly, our brains in healthy ways. Connect with people as best as you can now that the world is opening up and that's possible. And you can certainly track your use with apps. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So many of you have families or loved ones in mind probably as I work through this presentation. So what can families do? It's really important that families prepare, right? So if you know that some changes are going to be needed within your household, it's really important that you have these discussions with the person that's struggling, but as a family. So decide ahead of time when rational minds are working, what the warning signs or the clues to disconnect look like. So if you have a young one, right, trying to take the device away or saying you went past your hour limit in that moment, because they are so hooked into it and so excited, they cannot think rationally. So they're in their emotion mind. And this is where you see temper tantrums and arguments and somebody, threatening suicide. So it can get very, very intense. But if you talk about these things, if you put a behavioral contract in place and say, hey, remember this contract, oftentimes this way to prepare for it can be very helpful for folks. So agreeing to terms. When the rational mind is working, it helps the emotion mind from taking over when somebody's in that moment. And work together to make household changes, which I'll talk about in a second. But it's really important that we recognize that a lot of people are using technology to cope, right? To escape, to deal with some mental health challenges, which we all experience. But it's also a really exciting outlet to deal with boredom, right? Or for us to connect. So the more that we recognize this as a coping strategy for a lot of us and not say that technology is bad, the more we can work with it. It's really important to recognize that devices provide temporary relief. So if you have someone that's actively in a temper tantrum and you give them that device, it now becomes that coping strategy to diffuse the temper tantrum. So we have to make sure that people are going through, like moving through their stress responses. It's okay to have a temper tantrum. It's okay to be really upset with something, but they have to have more effective coping strategies than technology. And a big thing for me this year was learning that multitasking does not work. So a lot of us pride ourselves on the ability to multitask, right? Some of you might have been listening to this and doing a chore and checking something online and also being mindful of your phone. And so a lot of times we feel like we're accomplishing a lot while multitasking. We can feel incredibly productive. However, research shows that we're actually 40% less productive. So what I want to encourage you folks is to try to minimize the amount of tabs open, the amount of devices that you check in a few minutes to an hour, close multiple browsers, try to complete one task at a time. And this is really important for our young ones as well. Doing one task from start to finish really teaches us skills and strategies to follow through. So that can be really, really important. Now, healthy usage within the home. The biggest changes that I have seen happen with clients is when a family makes changes together. So it's not just on one person, it's on a family to identify the changes they'll make together. So limiting screen time for everyone. Recognize that when kids are hooked into their devices, a lot of time they're seeing that from their parents, not recognizing, of course, parents have a lot of extra responsibilities than kids, but remember that learned behavior does happen. So they're watching parents or loved ones on devices and they're using their devices. It's a very normal process. So as adults, we want to model healthy tech use. This is really important as clinicians as well. So not to be checking our phones in session, to be going too much to the computer, to really give someone your undivided attention. For some folks, it's implementing a digital diet or detox. The two are very much different. A digital detox is when you're completely removing screens and devices for a period of time. Some people have a lot of success with that. In reality, we're going to need to slowly introduce them to technology. So my recommendation for folks that have moderate issues to mild issues is the digital diet. So ensuring that we're disconnecting from our screens at least 1 hour before bed. Maybe we're only watching 2 Netflix shows a night as opposed to 4 or 5. So there's certain things that we can do to acknowledge that we're making changes. We're trying to do things differently. Opening the lines of communication. So a lot of times parents say, I don't know what they're playing. I don't understand it. I just don't get it. Kids have this deep desire to feel accepted and understood. So what that might mean for some parents is taking the time to play games with them, right? To ask them about their characters, to really hear the things that they're talking about, to make sure that they're in a safe space. So being very curious and opening the lines of communication is so important. As a family, try to implement a screen-free day. We have a very short summer left to enjoy. So try to get out on weekends. One evening a week is really try to remove yourself from screens as best as possible. Involve everyone in the planning of these rules. So when I work with families, a lot of times the parents will be making the rules, which makes sense. But when we ask our young ones what they hope to see change from mom or dad or whomever is the caretaker, is they want to see them use their devices less. They want to see them be less stressed. So making these decisions and commitments as a family can be so important. Staying informed with what's happening with the tech industry. It's really important to be mindful of, influencers, of esports, of gambling, of virtual reality, of all these things that are becoming widely accepted and usable also in our field. It's super important to try to keep up to date as best as you can by attending trainings or workshops like this, or doing some research on your own. And of course, educating kids about the internet. It can be a very exciting yet very dangerous place. It's very easy to go down the rabbit hole on a lot of platforms. So it's important that our young ones know about the internet, but also how it can impact their mental health or risk for substance use or behavioral issues. And we can also use our screens differently. So we can listen to podcasts, right, as we're moving around, as we're walking. We can learn on the go. And so following people that really speak to wellness can be very important. Now, how clinicians can support. So just giving some possible questions or treatment recommendations, which are best practice. It can be as simple as asking some of your clients about what games they play or websites that they commonly access. So I come from the lens where I work with folks with gambling or overspending or tech or pornography issues. So by simply asking about websites that people visit, it can really give you a lot of information as to what might some of the largest problems be. Ask about how long they're on devices per day or per week, and recognize that most smartphones have built-in trackers that you can utilize with your clients. It can be a great reference for checking in with them each week. All right, pull up your tracker. Let's see how much time you did spend on Instagram. Ask them what would happen if they digitally detox for one day. That can be a goal. For a lot of my clients, we start with a few hours or half a day to see if they experience any withdrawal or what mental health challenges did come up for them. Ask them about purchasing and how they're using money online. This is really, really important if you're parents or if you're clinicians to adolescents. You want to make sure that they're not overspending. Now, treatment recommendations, of course, there's the digital detox, completely removing access for a period of time, or there's the digital diet, which is focused on balanced use. Motivational interviewing, informed CBT can be really great. Basic sleep hygiene education, that should be at the very top. That's certainly something that we want to educate our clients to. Narrative therapy can be a safe space for individuals to explore the challenges and connect it to their emotions. And for a lot of people that have self-esteem or mental health challenges, values and strengths exercises can be so important for them. So they recognize that they can harness the energy they're putting into the games and use that in creative ways in the real world. Now, coming to the end of my presentation here, there are apps for support. This could be a presentation in itself. So there is a handout attached to the platform on HOVA, and here's some additional resources that I put together. But essentially, as I was mentioning, we can use our screen time trackers on phones. We can also set daily and weekly goals, which are very helpful with specific platforms or with our technology in general. There's one called Off the Grid. I would not recommend this for kids. I would recommend this if you yourself are trying to make changes. So what this does is it locks you out of your phone for a set amount of time. And actually, if you tried to go above it, it would charge your credit card $1 for exceeding the time. So again, this can run you into some financial challenges, but if you're really committed to making these changes, it can be a great app. Another one by Thomas Kahn is to Lock My Phone. There's also, if you look online, some creative devices where you can shut down the internet. So it's really great to look into some of these things like that. Freedom is a new app that came in my direction. There is an annual subscription, but this is for some people that have really excessive tech issues or overspending. So Freedom, again, it's an annual subscription, but it blocks gambling, gaming, and shopping apps for a specific period of time, or it allows you to block the internet. So for some folks, they can install this, I believe it's on 4 or 5 devices, and you can say for the rest of the evening, for the rest of the week, for a week, I'm not going to use this, and it's blocked. There's also a variety of wellness apps. Mind Shift is one that came to my attention recently. So it's a free self-help designed for anxiety relief. It has a CBT approach. It gives you tools that you can use, but also affirmations, mindfulness activities. So Mind Shift is a really great modern day app to use. And Super Better. So this is a harm reduction activity or app for anyone that's trying to reduce and focus less on the consumption and more on the creation piece. So Super Better actually has a series of games and challenges which are connected to the real world. So if you were giving a business proposal and that fell through, how would you operate? How would you act? So it gives individuals really great strategies and skills that are applicable to the real world. And it really helps with overcoming vulnerability. So this can be great for individuals who struggle with anxiety, especially social anxiety. So they're able to practice and use some of these. Recommended readings. There's a variety. I just selected 2 that were fresh on my mind. So there's Mindful Tech by David Levy, which is all about mindful using technology, very applicable to clinicians as well, as we're expected to be hooked into a series of devices for sometimes it feels like extended hours. And Dr. Kimberly Young, I really want to emphasize her if you are supporting any young ones. So she is a pioneer in the industry, and she has a website called Net Addiction, a variety of resources for young ones, adolescents, adults, but specifically, as I mentioned earlier, she has something called the 3-6-9-12 parenting guidelines, which gives a formula for how much technology people along those ages should have, with the idea that if they follow similar guidelines as to this and slowly introduce technology, by the time someone hits the age of 12, they should have enough skills and strategies to be able to use it in a healthy manner. Okay, so that's brought me to the end of the presentation here. I really appreciate you guys going through this with me. I know that we have some time left, so I'm happy to open it up if anybody has any questions or comments.
And for anybody that's got any questions or comments, can you please use the raise hand feature so we could unmute you as required there. And actually, just a very quick, Dr. Kimberly Young, I've listened to her lectures a couple of times. She really is an expert in the part, and you used the word pioneer. We had her at the conference quite a few years ago, but she is a pioneer for sure. Anyways, I'll open it up for everybody else and I'll shut my mouth.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. I was going to say, I'll try to sift through the chat. There's a lot here, so you're welcome to verbally ask any questions.
And just as a side note, we have a copy of the chat that we can send you, Ashley, in case there's some questions that we don't get to, and that way you can have, maybe connect with people after the fact.
That sounds good.
And we have a few people there. I'll let you ask who you want, Ashley. They got their hands up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep.
Go ahead, Liz.
So I'll just give a little context. I do prevention groups with teenagers in a school-based setting. And one of the things that we normally do in the group is have the students identify what the highlights and the worst parts of their week were. And typically for students where everything that they share is connected to one of their gaming activities or social media or something like that, once they sort of start to get to know other people, I start to set a standard that they need to share something other than that and set an expectation that we want to hear about something other than the gaming. And throughout the pandemic, it's been interesting to shift because for so many of them, the gaming is part of how they're connecting with their friends when they're not able to be with each other in person. So I've more or less shifted to getting them to talk about, if all of the things they want to share are related to their gaming stuff, getting them to talk more about how the social connection part of it is meaningful for them rather than just focusing on the specific gaming part.
Yeah, that's really important, Liz, is the fusion of the two, right? So as much as we want to welcome in the conversation of the gaming culture, because that's how they connect and understand each other, really asking people to dig deep and say, well, what's one thing you're grateful for eating, right? What's one thing that you notice outside? And so you're on to something there. You're making them think about other things, which is really healthy for them. I know there was another hand up. I believe it was Susan, if she's still here.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I sent you a message. I hope you'll get to see it. I'm not sure where it is in this technology, but I was thinking during your presentation, because I have some clients who are struggling with a 13-year-old not getting any sleep because of her phone use. And currently they've been instructed, not by me, but to take away her phone at a particular time in the evening. And she has had a lot of trauma in the past and can't go to sleep and throws a temper tantrum, and they're scared. So they're not, their strategy has been just to keep enforcing this rule, and nothing changing, obviously. So I just wondered if you have any quick advice.
Yeah, so of course, in this forum, we wouldn't be able to really talk too much about treatment, but I think that's a really, realistic, real life example. The one thing that I like to say is, regardless of where a family is getting recommendations, the parents have to set rules and guidelines which they believe in. And so when they set these guidelines, it's really important that they remain consistent with them, right? So too often we see parents set some really challenging ways for a young one to digitally diet or detox. And then they say, you know what, they're just too sad and I love them too much, so I want to give them all this technology back. So it becomes actually quite confusing when there's kind of the hot and cold behaviors with technology. Now, because I don't know this person or the case personally, and I know you did a really great job at explaining it, Susan, I'm always happy to connect offline and chat a little bit more about it specifically. But yeah, it's really important as a family, like the parents have to truly believe in the rules that they're setting, and they're very, very hard. So it's most important that parents are also connected with a form of support so they can talk about how challenging it is, so they can have safety plans for themselves as well as their young one. And it's really about building a healthy support network. So the more services oftentimes involved with those challenging cases, the more that the parents feel like they have a support and that individual struggling feels like they have their own separate support, that can always be super helpful as well.
Thank you, Ashley.
You're welcome, Susan. Christine, go ahead.
Hey, mine's kind of on a personal note. As a parent, I have a Comic-Con loving family. We are at Comic-Con all the time. We're always online gaming. And I have a 25-year-old son now. So can resonate to why we don't bathe and why we all smell. I'm not sure if you've ever been to a Comic-Con and went into a room where they're all gaming. I just don't get it. I don't get why bathing isn't part of gaming. But I took a different approach, and I just wondered your opinion if this is a good approach, because as a parent, I started to really struggle with my son in high school. He was constantly gaming. And what I noticed is when I walked into the room, I would get attacked. So obviously I come from the field of death and dying. So everything is measured on you're alive, you're not dying. So my parenting skills are very free in the sense that you're alive and you're healthy. So what's wrong with gaming? So one day I got very frustrated and I videotaped him at about 2 a.m. When I walked into the bedroom, he turned to me and just started cursing and just saying like, what the hell are you effing doing? Blah, blah, blah. And I videoed it, went to bed. I did not respond or react to his reaction to me being there. And I texted it to him. To my surprise, the next day, I get a phone call from school and he started working on a project about video game addiction. And the person he saw in the video, he was mortified.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that's a good approach to use if you're a parent, or if that might just scare the living crap out of your kid, because that seemed to really alter all of it. That changed the direction. How the heck do you get them to clean themselves, though? That is my question to you. How at 25 do I get the boy to regularly wash, maybe brush our teeth? Because all we do is game and go to work. We're quite successful now, but I still don't get the hygiene part. So that's my question.
Yeah, well, first of all, Christine, I really appreciate you bringing that conversation in. There are some really good points there. The first one with the videotaping, I don't think we have to make a habit out of it, but that's actually a really great strategy, because a lot of folks, regardless of the addiction that they struggle with, when they're so in that behavior, they're not thinking rationally, right? They're connected to that emotion mind. So you tell someone to get off and they're hooked into something, they're like, what the heck? I don't want to, I hate you, get out of here. They don't even realize the stuff that comes out of their mouth because they're just trying to protect that behavior. They're trying to protect that moment for themselves. So actually filming, and this is something that we do often, so I'm glad that you do that, it's filming them when they're in that kind of hot zone, right? And then showing them when they're more grounded. This is how a lot of young ones say, you know what, I do have a problem, or you know what, I do need help and I do need to make changes. So it's a really great kind of motivational method of doing that, especially with young ones or partners, etc.
I found the key element was not to respond. Like my child was telling me to go F myself over and over again because he didn't want me to turn that computer off. But I just silently backed out of the room and decided I'm not going to engage in this argument. I'm going to go to bed and then show you tomorrow. And now he just spent every day apologizing. But I realized if I had fought back, I think I would have had a war. And he's 6'7", so I wasn't going to go there.
Yeah, oftentimes, it's a defense mechanism. So when somebody's being hostile or angry towards you, they just want to shut down that moment, right? Something personal has touched them and they want it gone, right? And so not reacting, doing exactly what you just mentioned can be so helpful, and coming back to it. That's the key, is it's not sweeping it under the rug and saying, well, that happened, because that's when things can start to become habitual, is dealing with it when the person's in a more regulated frame of mind. Now, the hygiene thing, that is so big, especially amongst our gamers. And so a lot of times it can be creating a checklist, right? So you absolutely have to do this before you go to Comic-Con, right? You absolutely have to build in breaks, especially if someone's in a tournament or, playing for more than 1 to 2 hours. They have to have a water break, right? They have to get up and breathe some fresh air. And so sometimes making a little checklist that they can have by the computer can be a reminder. A lot of times they need prompts. So know that any click screen that pops up that says, you got to take a break, they're just going to say no, right? But if they have somebody constantly reminding them, or if they practice this consistently, it can become a habit.
But why is it correlated to gaming? Like, are other addictions, do people not take care of their hygiene too?
Oftentimes I find
that's a thing.
Definitely. Self-care will be the first thing to go when there's a problem.
Okay, I'm out when it comes to that then.
Yeah, some people it's their sleep, it's, they'll neglect some meals. For some people it's, I'm not going to put deodorant on or shower, right? Because I am hooked into this. Another thing I'll recommend, if you do have people that are intensive gamers, oftentimes making a self-care kit to take on the go can be really helpful. So a quick little deodorant, a comb, a little face wipes, like having these on the go. So again, they can just take a moment to do that and take a break can be really important. But
I just wanted to share one last note about it. We were on Family Feud this year, and my son had to play Fast Money. And I think it was the very first time I saw him brush his teeth. And I was like, you really can't embarrass the family publicly. And so we all got together and did an intervention and dressed him up and made him look good. But he didn't win the 10,000, but he looked pretty good.
Well, that sounds like a fun family experience. So you obviously do a lot together, and that's really most important. So it might just be like family toothbrush time within the home or something like that.
I've given up. He's 25.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Christine.
much. I really
No
appreciate it.
problem. Yeah, no worries. Any other questions? I'm sorry if I'm sifting through the chat a little bit here, but you're welcome to ask them verbally. It would be super helpful. Tara, go ahead. We'll get you to unmute here.
Are you finding, especially with adult gamers, that it's causing a lot of marital issues if they're married?
Absolutely. That happens a lot with our gamers and our gamblers and our overspend, actually all of the programs that we service. So, you know, a partner feels very neglected and very rejected, especially if you're under the same roof and just in totally different areas. So, you know, that goes back to kind of the family boundaries, right? Tech-free zones, making a commitment to sit down for dinner each night without any devices present. So that might be kind of entering a bit of a negotiation with the person that's struggling to say, you know what, this is too much and we have to put some boundaries in place.
And then you can input your case.
Ashley, if there's no more questions, we can let everyone go and give them a little bit of downtime for the next networking and sessions, and then we can get you any other questions, or if anyone wants to reach out, we can make sure that they're in touch with you and have a copy of the session.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you everyone for attending today.